Well, we went a little long talking about Bradley Beal and his possible future in Miami, but there's still concerns about this season, especially when it comes to Jimmy Butler's health. And we'll talk about the latest issue regarding Jimmy, whether or not he'll be able to stay stupidly locked in for the playoffs. But we'll also address some late game offense and what Miami might have to do to change their rotations in order to bring out the very best version of this team as they head for the playoffs. Stay tuned right here on this episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Wednesday edition again of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host Wes Goldberg. We had a second episode stemming from our first parter. If you haven't checked it out, we talked about Bradley Beal. We went a little long in that conversation just because it opened up so many potential different options there. We started talking about the latest reports regarding Bradley Beal and his future potentially in Miami. And then we started taking into a bigger conversation about who you might trade for Tyler Herro and things of that sort. Not that a trade is exactly what we would do, but rather from the perspective of this front office. So make sure you go check that out. But right now, all eyes are on this season and what this team could do as they make their march to the playoffs. And there was a tweet from Ira Winderman following the tough loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. And I think of it as a tweet heard around the Heat world there because, as he mentioned kind of casually, Jimmy Butler limping to the podium in a post-game press conference there. And it's something that you and I have talked about all season long, Wes, is the concerns over Jimmy Butler's health. You jokingly tweeted at me yesterday that why is Jimmy Butler even playing this game, or that you thought I would make some comment about Jimmy Butler playing in that Philadelphia game. Of course, they wind up losing. He winds up aggravating whatever injury or lingering injury he has. Some person in the comments has made has offered feedback regarding my take on Jimmy Butler, or maybe it was via Twitter. It's hard to keep track of these things sometimes. Look, my feeling is that Jimmy has been nursing an injury, and it's been an ongoing issue for the last 3 seasons, and I think it's just going to continue to get worse. When he rests, he looks great. He looked great against Philadelphia, but I think these things are going to continue to take their toll on him throughout the rest of his career, whether it's a wrist injury or a thumb issue or something with his feet, his ankle, his toe, something, because there's a lot of miles on those tires and the tread is beginning to wear off. And given that, I have concerns about Jimmy being able to stay healthy throughout the rest of the regular season and the playoffs. And I'm not sure if Miami's prepared for the eventuality. Like I can already hear a large chunk of Heat Twitter saying, oh, but they won without Jimmy when he was hurt. They won without Bam. They won without Kyle. The playoffs are different, people. This is why none of this matters. Like their great record in the regular season, their number 1 seed in the East, all fantastic, feel-good stuff. That doesn't necessarily translate. If you recall what Miami did before they went to the bubble, they were a pretty average team. They were good. They came on strong. They tailored off a little bit. They made some trades for Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala, and then the bubble happened. And that was the perfect storm for the Heat to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But the regular season for Miami may not necessarily translate, and it's certainly not going to do that if you don't have Jimmy Butler, who is still your best player on this team.
Yeah, you wonder if that bubble doesn't happen if they didn't have months break between the regular season and the bubble, right? Where Jimmy Butler was fresh for that bubble run. Look, I understand what you're going, what you're kind of getting at with the Jimmy Butler rest stuff. I don't know how much rest he needs, or how much rest would even help at this point, or at this point of his career, with all of the minutes that he's played and all of the injuries that he's incurred and all this, if it's just we're past the point of no return. And I actually kind of think we're more there than, hey, let's give the guy a week off and see what happens for the playoffs. There's also something to be said about, playing your best basketball going into the playoffs. I don't know if that's going to matter, but I just know it's a factor in that kind of decision-making process. The other part of this too is good luck getting Jimmy Butler to rest for a week before the playoffs or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm concerned about Jimmy Butler's health. I actually don't think it's up to Jimmy Butler to make up for an unhealthy Jimmy Butler. That's where I think it falls onto Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro and these other guys to step up. Jimmy Butler had that great bubble run. He dragged the Miami Heat between Jimmy Butler dragging that team with his two-way play and Jay Crowder basically morphing into Klay Thompson for a series and all that stuff. That's what got the Heat to the finals that year. That does not mean that's what's going to get the Heat to the finals this year. This year, it's going to be more about balance. It's going to be about Kyle Lowry flipping a switch like we've started to maybe see based on that game against Philly. And it's going to be with Tyler Herro, I think, becoming the answer to that late game offense. I think it's going to be with Bam Adebayo stepping up and being the aggressive Bam Adebayo that we've seen it for certain parts of the season. That's how I think this Heat team gets to the finals, not with an incredible historic two-way performance the way Jimmy Butler had 2 years ago. You just can't count on that kind of stuff. Not with Jimmy Butler a year and a half, 2 years older, and not when you need to compare things to historic performance. That's the thing about historic performances. They don't usually happen twice. And so with Jimmy Butler, you just can't count on that again. It's up. But his teammates, Bam, Tyler, the point guard position, like his team is better than it was in the bubble year. And so it would be on them to sort of make up for whatever drop-off there has been with Jimmy Butler.
Good points. And I think that leads to another question about whether or not this team can make up for a Jimmy Butler that might be at 50%, because we saw in last year's playoffs that wasn't the case. So maybe we'll touch on that in the next segment before giving a 10-game look ahead for the rest of the regular season, how Miami might be able to tweak their rotations as they prepare for a deep playoff run. But before we do all that, just a reminder that this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Look, it's late in the year already. It's mid-March, even as we're recording this. So a lot of people giving up on the idea of resolutions and all that. That seems like 3 months ago. But having said that, you're still looking to make improvements in your life. You're still looking to eat healthy. You're still looking to work out and improve yourself as well. You should. And then the best thing you could do for that, well, you know what? Grab the right snack that keeps you going throughout the day, that tastes great and gives you all the nutrients that you're looking for without sacrificing. And the taste, what you're looking for is Built Bar. It's the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. They're soft, easy to chew, 100% covered in chocolate. It tastes great. So many different flavors to choose from. You can try some of their, I know, Wes, you're a big fan of the coconut flavored one, just like I'm a big favorite. I'm a big fan of the mint brownie collection. That's just delicious. So many great flavors. You'll find the one that you like best, and you can get your mixed box with all of your favorites. That's what I love about it. It's just so many different options. And if there's some that you don't like for whatever reason, and I'm not saying that you can, I just don't think it's possible. But if you don't like some of them, you can give them away to friends, families, coworkers, and believe me, they will appreciate the gift. They're low calorie, high protein, and they have all the things that you might be looking for a variety of different diets. So go to built.com right now and scroll down and find the right bar for you, and make sure that you use the promo code LOCKED15 so you get 15% off on your next order at built.com. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order of Built Bars.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast. Nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. David, the end of game offense.
Oh, this is sorry. Before we do that, can I bring up another question about Jimmy Butler? I know that we want to talk about the offense and the rotations and everything else like that, but something that I'm thinking about, like you mentioned, the historically great individual performances and whether or not everybody can step up. Can this team win without that great individual player and just a collection of guys stepping up on occasion? Because that's kind of how it felt during that bubble run before we saw those great performances from Jimmy Butler. We saw Bam have his moments. We saw Goran in the first series against Milwaukee have his moments. We saw Jay Crowder obviously catch fire. And then we saw Jimmy morph into a historically great player in the finals, carrying a team that was missing two of their starters and two of their best players. But you look at this roster right now with Kyle Lowry, with Tyler, everybody else that you had mentioned before. If they all step up at various times, would that be enough to keep this team afloat as they make their run through the playoffs? Or given the way that the NBA has changed over the last couple of seasons, will it still count? Will it still require somebody to have a transcendent individual performance consistently throughout the playoffs? I mean, we're not saying every game because you're still going to have an off game, but do they still need that great individual player to carry this team into the finals?
I don't know. I really that's kind of what we're going to find out. Like, it kind of to go back to part one of today's episode, the whole conversation about whether or not you want to trade for Bradley Beal or something like that. It's basically, we understand that the Heat don't have a star player, the level of, the Jokic's, the Giannis's, and all that kind of stuff. That's what's so curious to me. I don't know if they need that player or not. The same kind of goes for Phoenix. I think the Suns are the best bet in the NBA right now, but they don't have that player either. But can Devin Booker sort of transform into that player? Can Chris Paul become that player for the stretches that they need those players for? I don't know. The only time we've seen a team win without anybody in the top 5 in the MVP voting, right? Yeah. So that is basically the 5 most valuable players that season, right? So it has nothing to do with incumbencies or anything like that. The last time we saw a team win the championship without a player who finished in the top 5 in MVP voting was the 2014 San Antonio Spurs. It's not the only time it's ever happened, but it's the only time it's happened in this sort of super team player empowerment era, right? We can go back to those old Pistons teams in the early odds. Yeah. That was a different era of NBA basketball. I don't even care about it. The only time we've seen it in the player empowerment era, basically since LeBron started changing teams, is the 2014 San Antonio Spurs. There was a lot of things that happened with that, right? They ran into a Heat team that was just tired on the edge of a dynasty. There was a lot of different things. But that's the only time we've ever seen it, right? And that was, again, even with that Spurs team, I don't want to take anything away from that group because that was an historically great team that could have just as easily won the year before in 2013, right? And so are these Suns or are these Miami Heat, are they as good as those Spurs teams? We'll find out in the postseason. We won't know until the playoffs are over. But that's the kind of team it would take. And I don't think Tim Duncan or Tony Parker or Manu Ginobili, I mean, you could argue that Kawhi Leonard, but he wasn't MVP level Kawhi, even in the 2014 series. So I don't know.
And we kind of overlooked this because in context of Heat fandom or even Heat coverage for us, we kind of overlooked the fact that Spurs team was transformative. Like, they were really, really good. They weren't relying on a 3-point shot, even as the 3-point shot was becoming more and more widely used, but they just moved the ball so well. I mean, if you saw the finals, and I'm sure a lot of you were pained by it, the fluidity, the precision, the looking for the right open shot, moving the ball.
And that's what stands out about this Miami team is they do that, right? They move the ball so well when they're on. You're right. When they're on. I think when the starters are playing heavy minutes and when push comes to shove, they will the basketball IQ will stand out, and this team can move the ball like those Spurs teams did. I have no doubt about that in my mind. Just like the Suns can in the Western Conference, but the Warriors can do that too in Golden State. Those are the 3 best ball movement teams in the NBA. Miami's not worse at just ball movement than any of those teams. They're not. They could be better than those other 2 teams. That's what it's going to take, right? And I do, to your point, it'll take somebody stepping up in a way that we have not seen in the regular season at end of games, because there are going to be close games in a 7-game series. Jimmy Butler, that mid-range game, that stuff, that needs to turn around. Or Tyler Herro needs to become that player. Or Bam Adebayo needs to become that player. Maybe it's all 3 of them for different series, different stretches, different matchups. Yes. I don't know. But they're going to need their – as good as this team has been to earn the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, you don't win the championship by being as good as you were in the regular season. You win the championship by being better than you were in the regular season. We still don't really know what this Heat's team ceiling is. I don't think we've really found out yet. I don't think we're going to find out until the playoffs begin.
But you have some ideas, right? I mean, you've got some ideas regarding the end of game offense and whether or not they can change the rotation around that might be able to bring the best version of this team.
I just think the end of game offense stuff is a little overstated. I know that Jimmy Butler's crunch time minutes and advanced metrics are in the toilet. I get it, but when we're talking about crunch time metrics, we're discussing such a small sample, right? Like for instance, Miami going into that game against the Sixers, top 5 defensive rating in crunch time, right? That's really good. After that game against the Sixers, they've dropped all the way to 13th in the NBA in crunch time defensive rating. That's not because they were so bad, they weren't great at the end of that game, But that's just because those small samples have such huge fluctuations when we're talking about per 100 possessions and things like that when you sort of extrapolate. So I'm not as concerned about the crunch time stuff. I know that Jimmy Butler, that shot hasn't fallen completely the way that we are accustomed to seeing it. I think Tyler Herro has actually been really good in crunch time all season. Again, the Philadelphia game notwithstanding. But my concerns about that aren't as I'm not as concerned as most Heat fans tend to be. The other thing about this too, and I tweeted this thread, and it's what I'm looking at right now, but my biggest concern with Miami is just they're playing the wrong lineups in the fourth quarter. And you look at their best lineups, their starters. So with Duncan Robinson, with Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, plus 13 net rating in the NBA. That's third best among all NBA lineups that have played a minimum of 300 minutes. So heavily used lineups, right? They're the third best starting lineup in the NBA. You replace Duncan Robinson with Tyler Herro, and that net rating is just is plus 11.8 compared to plus 13. So basically the same, very close. Like those are two dominant lineups when they play together. The problem is neither of those lineups, the starters or the starters with Tyler Herro in place of Duncan Robinson, they don't play in the fourth quarter. The starters have played just 15 minutes in the fourth quarter all season. All season. The starters with Tyler Herro have played just 16 minutes together in the fourth quarter all season. You could even throw those two together. We're talking about 31 minutes with your best 5 or 6 players on the court in the fourth quarter all season. All season. You compare that to a team like Phoenix, their starters have played 91 minutes in the fourth quarter.
And that's with Chris Paul missing the last 2 months or whatever.
And that's with Chris Paul missing a bunch of time. And DeAndre Ayton missing some time also earlier in the season too. So that's, I know that it's hard to get to your starting and your best groups in the fourth quarter because you play them in the third quarter, right? Just like you start games with your starters in the first quarter, you start second halves with your starters in the third quarter. It would take a complete revamping of Spoelstra's rotations that have been pretty good all season long. And I know that he's also with the Heat, obviously, a bunch of injuries, a bunch of time missed across the board. But you even just start filtering this stuff since January or even the All-Star break when this team has started to get healthy. It's not much better, right? Like they're still not getting their best players on the court in the fourth quarter, even when they're completely healthy. I think they need to, once they're healthy, they need to start getting those guys in the game in the fourth quarter more. Maybe that'll naturally happen in the playoffs. Most of their starters are averaging 30 to 33 minutes per game. When you start to tick those minutes up closer to 36, 37, 38 minutes, maybe they're just getting in the games in the fourth quarter faster, and you just start to see a natural uptick in their time together in the fourth quarter. That might be the solution to everything that I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you can get those guys more time earlier on in the fourth quarter, I think you'll encounter fewer crunch time situations because you're going to be able to run away with some of the, or you're going to be able to win these games in a way that you haven't won. This is a team that is outscoring opponents by 10 points per 100 possessions in the first quarter when their best players are playing together. They're one of the best teams in the league in the third quarter as well. If you can get some of that and bottle it up and put it in the fourth quarter, in a good spot in the fourth quarter, earlier on, I should say, in the fourth quarter, then I think that these games will just be less tight, right? Because you'll start to, obviously win these games by a larger margin, even in the postseason.
I can't say, even looking ahead to the last 10 games of the schedule, the regular season schedule, and I'm not sure that Miami's going to have a lot of opportunities to put those teams away earlier. Like, we looked at this schedule and following the All-Star break, and there was a lot to be optimistic about because Miami had a lot of games at home, and they still do. They're 6-4, 6 games at home, 4 games on the road, and one of those is against the interstate rival Orlando Magic, interstate rival. Having said all that, look, they take on Golden State on Wednesday tonight when you'll be watching or hearing this podcast. They have a back-to-back set on Friday and Saturday of this week against the Knicks and Nets. The Knicks might not be good, but the Nets are looking to make some damage. And of course, Kyrie Irving, who had a 50-point game, 60-point game was it? He's a pretty good player, and he'll be available to play against the Heat on Saturday. They're taking on the Kings, who will be missing Domantas Sabonis. They're not particularly good, but they've always had Miami's number, and De'Aaron Fox has been a problem for Miami to contain in late game situations. Then they travel to a brutal 3-game stretch against other teams that are looking to make a push for the playoffs themselves. The Celtics Chicago and Toronto, and the Bulls and Raptors are on a back-to-back set. And then they come back home to take on a Hornets and Hawks team that'll be fighting for play-in activity, or maybe even looking to make a push for the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference standings before wrapping up things against the Magic in Orlando. So of those 10 games, like, there's a lot of challenging opportunities there, and not necessarily great ones for Miami to say, oh, let's tweak our late game rotation a little bit. Let's make the changes that you were talking about earlier in order to bring out the best version of this roster or the best version of this offense. And I don't know. I think we're going to see things get a little bit worse over the next 10 games. And the hope is then that they'll probably be able to find a way of pulling things together as they're approaching the playoffs, or once they actually get into the playoffs. Like, so much of what we hear from Eric Spoelstra is, let's play our best basketball as we get into the postseason. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to see that, because even today we get earlier reports that Victor Oladipo, Caleb Martin, Tyler Herro are all questionable against the Warriors. We have the injury concerns about Jimmy. Who knows if Kyle needs to take time off for personal reasons again? That's been kind of difficult to predict. And nobody knows exactly what the situation is, but you give him enough leeway to address whatever it is that he needs to address in his own time. So you might not have your full complement of players. And part of what's made this team really good is, well, next man up mentality.
Yeah.
You get this guy stepping up, but that's not what you're talking about.
And you're still trying to work in Victor Oladipo and see what you have there. Same goes with Markieff Morris, even though to a little bit of a lesser degree. I don't know. The Heat are not in a bad spot necessarily. They're just in an interesting spot.
Challenging one.
It's a challenging spot. It's with 10 games left now, there's still some questions. I think that pretty much goes for every team in the NBA, maybe again outside of Phoenix, but they're even trying to bring back Chris Paul at this point. We're not exactly sure when that's going to happen. It could happen as soon as tonight, according to some reports. But again, it's not a really big issue. I don't know that you need to completely revamp the rotation. I do think that once the playoffs roll around and you're just playing your best guys more minutes, that we'll see their best guys on the floor for more minutes in the fourth quarter. It's not a complete solution to the late game offense. I'm just saying it would help the late game offense. Instead of being down 5 in crunch time, maybe you're down 2 in crunch time. It's things, or maybe instead of being up 3 in crunch time, you're up by 7 or 8. And even if you're not that good in crunch time still, it's not that big of a deal. I don't know. But it's part of just getting your best players on the court more. And it's part of, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, you are going to need Jimmy Butler to make more crunch time big shots than he has in the regular season, in the postseason. You're going to need Tyler Herro to continue to step up. You're going to need Bam to take shots at the end of games. Yeah. He didn't take a single shot in crunch time against the Sixers. He's going to need to take shots in crunch time in the playoffs. It's going to take Kyle Lowry becoming more of a scorer like he said he would, but we'll see if that's the case. It's just going to take their best players being even better than they were in the regular season in the postseason.
And we talked about this. Look, you kind of hinted at it before as well. Like, even in our recap of the Sixers loss, those 3 players, Bam, Lowry, and Butler, all scored over 20 plus points. And that's what you want. They didn't get the same kind of complementary scoring. They had some defensive issues down the stretch. They didn't get it from Tyler the way they normally have. I think there's enough positives there to kind of look through in between the lines of all the negative things and the numbers and everything regarding late game offense. I think they'll find a way of just becoming the best players individually that they can be. Like, we start to see a more aggressive Kyle, a more aggressive Bam. If Jimmy can stay healthy, and I still maintain that, I think this is the key. Like, you're going to be able to get great performances from other players, and you're going to need that. Just like, think back to last year's run. Milwaukee got some great performances from Giannis Antetokounmpo, historically great ones that everybody will remember, but without other players stepping up here and there. Drew Holiday providing
Chris
something.
Middleton, Middleton, what was that, game 1, game 2, where he hit the game winner? You're right. It's going to take that. And I'm not even in the next 10 games. I really don't even care about wins or losses. You just want to see this team start to gel a little bit more and play with more energy than they did against Philadelphia. And I would even argue against Detroit, and even early on in that Oklahoma City game recently. It just feels like they hit a little bit of a lull recently. They need to snap out of that. They need to play with energy. They need to play with passion. PJ Tucker needs to turn his season around. post All-Star break. He's been shooting 20-something% from three. It needs to get closer to what he was doing at the beginning of the year. All this stuff needs to turn around, but the ball movement needs to be crisper. The energy needs to be better. Defensively, they need to be more locked in than they have been recently. And we've seen them do this, right? I just think maybe it's a little bit of a lull. I don't care about wins and losses these next 10 games as much as I care about just watching this team gel and play with that energy and that crispness that we know that they can do. And once you have that, then you're sort of setting the stage for these players to elevate their games in the playoffs. But before you get that total thing that we saw from the Heat for most of this season, you're not going to have the opportunity to see these other guys go up another level. You got to get the foundation set first. Fortunately, I don't think the Heat are far off of that. Because we've seen them do that for most of the season. What we're talking about, this lull, has basically been about a week. Okay, they just need to turn that around.
Yeah, and I would advise Heat fans not to put too much stock in the number one seed or anything like that. Like, there's a good possibility of Miami losing enough games over the next 10 where they might not stay number one in the Eastern Conference. And while we did argue recently that is important for this Heat team, I think it's more important for them to, again, as you pointed out, to gel, to show signs of trending in the right direction, and to stay healthy and to get the kind of appropriate rest that you need before what looks to be a long playoff run for this team, or at least that's the hope in Miami. But as always, make sure to stay tuned to our show. Make sure to subscribe to get the best coverage available. Wes and I will be at FTX Arena later on tonight when the Heat take on the Golden State Warriors. So make sure to check out our recap of that game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me again, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.